And welcome to our third and last presentation with the Nest Collective within Our House, Your Home at Stroom. Stroom Den Haag is a platform for visual arts, stimulating the art climate in The Hague and elsewhere. I'm Ludmila Rodrigues. I'm an artist from Brazil, based in The Hague, and I was invited by Stroom to host the Nest Collective within this program. Our House, Your Home is an experimental program of exchange based on hospitality, inviting international organizations for a mutual learning process. Tonight, we have Sunny Dolat, designer, curator, creative director, among many other things at the Nest Collective. He'll be sharing his research and project Nanga, through which he has collaborated with Lulu Kitololo and Monica Obaga. The Nest Collective is a multidisciplinary group from Nairobi, Kenya, working in film, music, fashion, visual arts, literature, and all possible media they can get their hands on. They are the fourth guests of Our House, Your Home, working with Stroom since September 2020. Due to the pandemic, we have experimented with this online hybrid co-learning format. Through their project, Material Languages, 3 members of the collective, Jim Chuchu, Njoki Ngumi, and Sunny Dolat, have been researching on textiles as a medium to unpack issues of belonging, identity, culture, and design. They reflect on what roles contemporary African textiles play in the arenas of ritual, collective healing, and memory. Interrogating Kenya's textile history, Sunny explores the connection between the country's textile history and their identity crisis. The project looks at traditional African textile histories and material cultures as a base within the ambition, with the ambition of developing ritual textiles, motif templates to create new, sustainable Kenyan and African textiles. We'd like to thank the Prince Claus Fund for Culture and Development, Mondrian Fund, and the Municipality of The Hague for the support in Our House, Your Home. Before Sunny takes over, we invite you to use the chat for sharing your thoughts and questions, and we'll collect them for asking him after the presentation. And now, please, let's welcome Sunny.
Thanks, Ludmila. Hi, everyone, and good evening. I think it's kind of good evening for everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. I need to. Okay, and so hopefully, Ludmila, you can see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
So this evening, I'll be taking you through my part of the Material Languages project that the Nest is doing with Stroom. And my part of the project is called Nanga. And Nanga is a Swahili word for anchor, which I strongly feel is a good way of understanding textiles as a sort of anchor or a tether. And now I can't scroll. Okay, there we go. And I thought it'd be important to start with this quote by the Ghanaian artist Ella Natsui, which is that cloth is to the African what monuments are to Westerners. And this quote I've always found is really important and useful in situating the importance of cloth within several African cultures. Okay, this scrolling is becoming a bit unwieldy. And across the continent, when you look at the history of cloth and the ways in which cloth has been used, cloth has had such a central place in many communities across the continent, whether as historical documents or commemorative cloth. If you look at these examples of cloth, these are 3 examples of commemorative cloth. The one on the left is from Benin. The one on the top right hand, I believe, is from Guinea. And the one on the bottom right is from Congo. And so across the continent, you really see cloth being used, cloth and textile being used in some very interesting ways. And even when you look at the kind of like traditional dress or costume, if you will, of several cultures across the continent, you start to find that the thing that is central, the thing that is important, is not the silhouette, but the cloth in and of itself. So if you look at kente cloth, for instance, within the Ashanti and the Ewe in Ghana, the thing that is important is the cloth. The silhouette of how you drape it is secondary. And you see that in many, many cultures across the continent. So I always find that quote by Elena Tsui really, really useful. And I only came across that quote early this year. And I've been using it liberally ever since. So heritage. As Africans, we are tremendously lucky to be born into a wealth of heritage textiles. There's a long, long list of textiles from across the continent. On this slide, we have Adire, there's Bogolan, there's Kuba, there's Akwete, there's bark cloth. Sorry, I should actually say where they're from. So Adire is from Nigeria, Bogolan is from Mali, Kuba cloth is from Congo, Akwete is from Nigeria. We have bark cloth from Uganda, Bamilek and Dop from Cameroon, Capulana from Mozambique, Lamba from Madagascar. It's a very, very long list. And one of the things that I've always been quite, maybe, I don't know if I should say dissatisfied, unhappy, uncertain of, is that especially media in the global north have this fixation on Ankara and using only, or rather only clothing that's made from Ankara and kind of like pushing that as African fashion. That certainly has changed and evolved over the past 3 or 4 years, but certainly before that, you had this entire list and trove of African textiles that were completely ignored, and they're really quite diverse. And so this is particularly why I have such a love-hate relationship with Ankara, not only because its origins are complicated as to how they ended up on the continent, but also because for many people, it's the only textile that they kind of mean or refer to when they're talking about African textiles. And yet there's literally dozens and dozens and dozens of others. But I wouldn't get too much into this because I feel like this kind of like deep dive into heritage textiles would be a whole other session by itself. And so right at the beginning of this project, and in many ways, the thought that birthed this project was a thought around duty. I had spent a lot of time wondering what responsibility or duty, which might be a heavy word, but I have thought a long time about using it, and I still feel like, yes, that duty or responsibility are the adequate words. But I've been wondering about, for those of us who work within this space of fashion and textile, we reference and use all of these textiles so much in our work, whether it's in the making of clothing or the making of home goods. You know, what is it, for the past 2 years, mud cloth, and a very particular style of mud cloth has been quite a hit in the realm of decorative home, and we've seen them we've seen it on furniture, we've seen it on cushions, and really people enjoying this textile. And I have spent time wondering what duty we have as Africans who have some sort of fluency around textiles to add to this trove of heritage textiles and African textiles. There are a couple of designers who I think, designers and artists who have been exploring this thought. So on the left-hand side, you have ashoke, which is a Nigerian textile. And we have the designer Kenneth Eze, also a Nigerian designer. And Kenneth spent a long time kind of looking at ashoke and the ways in which he could evolve it for his own brand. So those of you who might be familiar with Kenneth Eze's work, he's an incredibly talented and famous designer. He was a finalist for the LVMH award, I think in 2019, which Tebe Magugu, the South African designer, who then went ahead to win that award. But Tebe's work around with ashoke for me has been something really interesting and important to reflect on and to look at, because he not only put his own spin on the textile, but he also he re-engineered the loom that ashoke is woven on. This is some samples of Kenneth's ashoke. Burna Boy wore one of his coats to Coachella, which I thought was really cool. One of the things that he does with his ashoke is that it's woven, because traditionally ashoke is woven either from cotton or cotton and lurex. But then Kenneth uses a really fine Japanese silk. And so the resulting textile is just so beautiful and has this really stunning kind of like luster on the surface. So I'd like to share this quick video of his process. If the video will agree to play. Okay, I think I have to play the video in this format.
Sunny, we've made you a host. We can test, but I know Keynote sometimes doesn't want to play videos on full screen. I don't know why as well.
I see.
See? Oh, oh, maybe.
That's so strange. Played before. Technology has a very unique sense of humor, because we tested this morning and it agreed to play. Okay, so we'll just move on, and I'll play the video at the end. I should be able to find it on Vimeo where I saved it. Okay, so coming specifically and talking about textile history in Kenya. So Kenya doesn't necessarily have a very rich textile history compared to other parts of the continent. And this is really something that we started thinking about at the beginning of this project. I have a theory that the one indigenous textile or fabric, I don't think textile would be the adequate word, but certainly fabric that's indigenous to Kenya would be hides and skins, because it's something that we see worn in many communities across the country. So like, for instance, in this image, it's an image of 3 Maasai women. And I think that a lot of people always think that the Maasai have been wearing the shuka for centuries and centuries. But no, the shuka was introduced to the Maasai by Scottish missionaries. And so this is something that was slightly just before colonialism. So it's relatively new, and before that the Maasai wore hides and skins, just like many other communities across Kenya. And so when you look at this list of textiles in Kenya, so the shuka, which was introduced by the Maasai, by Scottish missionaries, the kikoy, which which traditionally was a Swahili men's textile that was actually worn to the mosque. This was kind of inspired by an Omani textile, an Omani men's textile. Then you have khanga, again, another Swahili cloth that's quite popular. I think many of you might know, would know it. And khanga is actually inspired by a Portuguese cloth, a Portuguese scarf called lenco. And so even the other name for khanga, which is lenco, is derived from the Portuguese name for lenco. And then we have Merikani. And Merikani was an imported cloth from America, hence the name. And it was worn by male slaves as a kind of like bottom wrap. And then we have Kaniki, which is actually an indigo-dyed Merikani, and that was worn by women. Kaniki and Merikani, for many, many reasons, died a quick death after the end of the East African slave trade, obviously because of the association with the slave trade. But what's interesting about Kaniki is that it shows some indication of a culture of indigo and indigo dyeing that existed in Kenya. It's something that we don't really hear or even see talked about a lot, because then it means that there's a couple of communities that were growing indigo and had this fluency of working with indigo that somehow gotten lost over the years. So these are some of the images. So you have kikoy. So the kikoy as we know it today and the kikoy as it was designed are two completely different cloths. The kikoy that we interact with today has been changed significantly to be marketed to tourists. So the bright colors, the very kind of like suggestive imagery are all things that are quite new. And so what this meant is that among Swahili men, the use of kikoy has dropped significantly because it's really not the textile that they know and that they would wear to mosque. And then you have the shuka there and the khanga. And so the way that Nanga is divided is it's divided into three different parts. So you have the one part around looking at ritual textiles and sacred cloths. Again, across the continent, there's many cloths that are considered sacred. For instance, in Madagascar, there's a textile called the lamba mena, which is a burial cloth, and so that's a textile that you really wouldn't use for anything else other than as a burial shroud. And this thought for me around sacred cloths and sacred textiles was kind of triggered by something that I was reading in Nepal, I believe it was. Someone had developed this really beautiful linen-like fabric made from the lotus flower. And it was designed for the monks. And I thought that as an idea, as a project, as a work, that was really beautiful, because the lotus flower does hold a very, very special and sacred place in Buddhist religion. And so it would make sense that a cloth that is made from the lotus flower would be worn by monks. And then I proceeded to read that Zegna, the Italian menswear brand, made a collection of suits from this fabric, and they were selling them for a ridiculous amount of money. And that really got me thinking about this idea of sacred cloths and cloths that are afforded a certain kind of respect. So one arm is around sacred cloths. Second arm is around kind of investigating natural, sustainable fibers and sustainable textiles. Sustainability has understandably been quite a big topic for the past couple of years. I think for me, the thing that's always really fascinating about the conversations around sustainability is that they tend to mostly be located in the global north, and the solutions then come from the global north to the global south, whereas I think that the champions of sustainability have always been the global south. I think that practices and processes across the continent have been inherently sustainable, and that truly, if anyone should be teaching the world about sustainability, I think that there's a lot that Africa has to offer, and much of the global south. And so I was really curious to explore this area of sustainable textiles. And then lastly, was the area of motifs, and developing a kind of like new motif language that is familiar. So many of you know Ankara or Dutch wax, or kitenge, although kitenge is an entirely different fabric, but in Kenya and most of East Africa, we use the terms interchangeably, Ankara, kitenge. But when wax cloth was being introduced into Africa, it was meant for Ghana, and then slowly was expanded into the West African market. And so when you look at the patterns of the very first wax cloths that got into the continent, the patterns, the motifs, the symbols were taken from Ghanaian culture. And so the very first wax cloth had adinkra symbols. And for those of you who might know adinkra symbols are a series of motifs that are really quite sacred in Ghana. And slowly over the years, whether it's the fan, whether it's a transistor radio, whether it's an aeroplane, all of these symbols in West Africa have meaning. However, when those cloths get to East Africa, when they get to Kenya, those patterns are reduced to just patterns. And it's been interesting to see that the kind of model that even Blisco have taken over the past couple of years is, as they see that their audience is more continental as opposed to West African, the patterns have been getting a little bit more abstract. Actually, not a little, they've been getting a lot more abstract, just so that they are able to sell them across the continent. And so I was curious to see if we could develop some patterns that were inspired by Nairobi for Nairobi. And so that's kind of like, this is the question that's been at the center of the three arms of Nanga, which is, can we truly develop textile heritage in 2020? Because I think that in many ways, this is exactly what this project is attempting to do. It's saying that just because we don't have an indigenous Kenyan textile doesn't mean that it's too late, or that just because it's 2020, 2021, that we can't do it, that indigenous textiles have to have originated from 100 years ago. But there is a possibility that they can have originated in 2020. So that's, kind of the kind of like central question throughout the three arms of the project. I know that the arm of Nanga that a lot of people are familiar with is the motives. And so I'd like to kind of talk through that a little bit. So I'll jump out of, I'll jump out of this presentation and I will go to another one. So for the motifs, we really wanted to work with Kenyan illustrators who would help us develop these motifs. So we commissioned two illustrators, so Lulu Kitololo and Monica Obaga. I saw Monica join the call, so hi Monica. I might ask you to say something, so I'm giving you a warning. And I'd really like to share kind of like the development process that we went through with the two artists over many months. As you can see, this process started last year around October, although for the conversation was had earlier, but then last year was last year. And so a lot of things we kept on pushing back and pushing back and pushing back. And I think that around October was when things started to look up. And so we're like, okay, we can do this. So the brief to both the artists was, I was really quite interested in developing a sort of like botanical print. If you look at a lot of African textiles, a lot of them are inspired by something botanical. For instance, if you look at the khanga, some of the very first prints of the khanga in Kenya and Tanzania, the motif is of a cashew apple, because the Swahili coast is a cashew growing region. And so what a lot of people tend to think is a paisley is actually the shape of the cashew apple and the cashew nut. So yeah, the brief was to be inspired by Kenya and Kenyanness, and then two prints, something botanical and something non-botanical, or urban, to be more specific. So this is kind of like Lulu's thought process. She was really interested in maize because it's a Kenyan staple. Some people call it corn, but we call it maize. And kind of taking that and seeing how she could abstract it, and even pushing it and seeing what kind of like digital possibilities there could be in interpreting that print. It was also really, because Lulu has had some experience with screen printing, she was also able to give us the option of doing a really, really simple template that we can then translate for screen printing. And so that was interesting to see kind of what's possible and what that could look like. And then for the non-botanical, she was really interested in faces. On the extreme right hand, there's these quite iconic sort of like batik wall hangings, artwork that are done by, I believe she's Swedish. And I think she might have lived in Kenya for a long, long time. And her name is Heidi Lange, but they're really quite iconic. We've all seen them growing up. And I thought it was really interesting for her to include this in the mood board, because for me, they were very familiar. And then she also went to look at just patterns inspired by other African textiles. So we have mud cloth here on the left, and we have cloth here on the right.
Sorry, Sunny, sorry to interrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, Sunny, to interrupt you. We don't see your screen changing anymore. We see only the slide 12 that is still asking, can we develop textile heritages? So where are you now? Sorry.
Oh, okay, hold on. I think I know what happened. So let's try this again. Okay, so can you see it now?
Yes, we can. Yay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You should have stopped me earlier. I'm really sorry.
We weren't sure, but now it's clear. Yeah.
Okay. So
if is it okay? Yes, please show us this the last ones. Thank you. Okay,
good. Sorry about that. So these are the slides I was talking about for the first 5 minutes. So yeah, so this is the mood board by Lulu. As I said, she was really interested in exploring maize, which is a Kenyan staple, and really taking that shape and the different parts of the maize plant and seeing how to abstract them. Digital, screen printing, faces, And on the extreme right, that's the Heidi Lange, kind of like batik work that I was talking about. And I think that this is where I'd gotten to, where I talked about the mud cloth on the extreme left and the Kuba cloth on the extreme right. Style possibilities, actually this way I got into. And then we also started to talk about kind of like color schemes. So she suggested a couple. I thought that this was really beautiful and would look quite nice on a range of skin tones. And I also really like this one, that kind of, I forget the exact name of that blue, but we really felt like that blue and that mustard and that brown and that black really came beautifully together. And so that's actually the color scheme that we settled for the first print. And then this was the last one. And I'll now open Monica's. Has it opened?
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
Okay, good. And so this was Monica's first mood board after receiving the brief. And she had two thoughts. One was around the flame tree. What was interesting was that Monica was able to put kind of like her own thoughts and her own politics and curiosity in the print development, which was amazing. She was able to highlight something that even I wasn't aware of, which is that all searches for, because locally we call this tree the Nandi flame tree, and that apparently all searches are related to an Elspeth Huxley's book. And this is a tree that grows everywhere. In fact, it's actually in bloom now. And there's a couple around where I live. And she was able to include a previous jacaranda print that she had developed. And then traffic, which is a thing that gives us a lot of stress in this here Nairobi. But we thought it'd be interesting to kind of develop this into a print. And this illustration that she included here is one of my all-time favorite illustrations by Monica. She had developed it for Airbnb, but for me, it's the small things that really make it Kenyan. The yellow line that we're all very familiar with, as well as the number on the matatu. So like this one is 23, which means it's a matatu for Westlands. So just those small details that really just locate it and lock it in Kenyanness and the Kenyan experience is something that I was really excited by. Actually, Monica, if you're here, can I throw you under the bus?
Sunny, maybe you need to allow her to, because now you're the host.
I see. Let's see.
Hi.
Oh, hey, Monica. How are you?
Good. This is out of the blue, but sure.
No, but I just wanted you to really quickly share your kind of thoughts and process of development of these two prints.
Okay, so I'll start with Nairobi traffic. That was actually something that was in my sort of trend radar. Right now you can see it in my colors, which are yellow, blue, and cream. And all the colors on screen are part of my signature coloring. But the thinking behind it was at the time, and I think up to now, vaporwave is really kind of strong. But I wanted to kind of have a sort of feminine, masculine, like a post-gender print that was geometric. So it could be small, could be in black and white, something you could, see on like a pair of Vans or whatever, just something universal and that calls to the fact that it's 2020, but the actual image itself is filled with geometricized sort of matatus and khangas. Those are the conductors that in our day, I don't know if they do this anymore, but they would hang off the actual the doors of the matatus while in traffic, while moving, and things like that. So I wanted it to kind of have a first glance global sort of appeal, but then when you look closely, it's like actually really specific to Nairobi. And then on the left, sorry, the Flame Tree was actually a book. The Flame Trees of Sika was a book that I read as a teenager by Elspeth Huxley about her own personal coming of age. And I was my family lived in Sika at the time, so I was a 16-year-old reading a book about Elspeth Huxley's teenagehood, moving from England to Kenya and then moving back. And she lived in, I think, Murang'a, I'm not sure, but somewhere really close to where I was at the time. And kind of experiencing my first thought of how all the books that I had read as a child were kind of escapes, because they were places that I'd never been and places I'd never imagined. And it was the first time that I was reading a book that was set where I was, and I was not obviously the primary audience. So there was definitely a lot of thinking about decolonizing that image of the flame tree, because it is something that is absolutely 100% local to our climate, our vegetative zone, and would actually be invasive anywhere outside of Eastern Africa. I decided to include the hummingbirds and the barbets because they are symbiotic. The hummingbirds feed off the flower, and the barbets make their nests in the actual tree. And just to like completely and absolutely localize it, even though the shapes of the prints are seem to kind of relate to the whole journey of the khanga, of the Kitenge, Ankara African print that Sunny was talking about earlier, kind of recalling that journey from Kyoto to Amsterdam, and then to Western Africa, and then to the rest of us, that like 100-year history or however long it's been. I wanted to kind of like reclaim that for ourselves, because in a way, even though it is ours, like Sunny said, it's pretty complicated, and I just wanted to kind of firmly set the context of the prints themselves in the here and now, and for specifically us.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Monica, and for allowing me to throw you under the bus. So these are the two prints that we ended up with from Monica. So we have Nandi Flame on the left and Nairobi Traffic on the right. One of my favorite details on the Nairobi Traffic print is the kange, who in English I guess is conductor, but then the name conductor doesn't translate as neatly, because I think that whenever you picture a conductor, it's someone in a uniform with like a machine who's very kind of like methodical in, you know, kind of like going around picking money, issuing tickets. And that's not kanges at all. Kanges are this really beautiful mix of chaos and style, and yeah, it's incredible. And I don't really think you can ever really separate the makangas from Matatu culture. And so Monica and I had a little debate about including him or her. But yeah, I really like that detail. And then from Monica, these are the two prints that we ended up with. So on the left is Harvest, which is a print that's inspired by maize or corn. And the colorway that we liked. And again, what's amazing about this print is that it really takes apart the maize plant. So you're able to see like a cross section of the cob, you're able to see the kernels in details as well as the cross section of the kernels. You see the leaf, and then you also see the locusts, which is again something that Lulu and I had a long conversation about. Last year, I mean, everything that was happening, Kenya also had to deal with a plague of locusts that were just massacring everything in their path. And so we thought that the inclusion of a locust would be an important timestamp for this textile. And then on the right, we have Hopeful Hands. And there's actually a really funny story behind Hopeful Hands, because so we had developed an entirely different textile, which I'll talk about briefly after. But then Lulu had done this really beautiful series of coastal inspired prints, and she had this series of hands with henna. And so for those of you who might know or might not know, but the Swahili coast, the Kenyan coast, has quite a rich and deep and long culture of doing henna for weddings, for actually even just for just. And so we thought it'd be nice to kind of celebrate that heritage in the coast. But beyond just having, you know, this nicely decorated hands, I also saw this as an opportunity to do something a little bit more. And so I started doing some reading about sign language, and thought that perhaps it would be really beautiful if we were to have these hands kind of like spell out something in sign language. And so the hands spell out hope in sign language. Because another thing that I've been thinking about is obviously the ableism that exists within fashion. And sometimes, actually quite often, not everyone is able to enjoy prints and textiles because they're very limited in the way that they're presented. And so I thought that this would be a nice kind of like first step towards creating a print that spoke to even more people. Again, in this print, there's a small detail of the frangipani. For anyone who's been to Mombasa or anywhere on the coast, you know that there's lots and lots and lots of frangipani trees. And one of my absolute favorite things is usually early in the morning, like if you've gone out for a walk, if you're staying at a hotel and you're going for breakfast, even if you're just like leaving and you're going out to town or wherever, there's always this really beautiful moment where the streets are just kind of like littered with all of these frangipani blooms that have fallen from the tree in the night. And I've always thought that it's such a beautiful and poetic sight. So I thought that would be really nice to include these frangipani blooms in this print, because I think that makes it even more coastal. Also because I'm very guilty of being one of the people who will who walk along the path and just kind of like pick up all these fallen blooms. So those are the prints. The other print that we developed with Lulu was actually a narrative print, which we decided to shelf for the moment. But again, during the process of this project, I spent a long time thinking about narrative prints. So a print that you can develop that, when put together, can tell a story. There's a few examples. I'm trying to think of an example on the continent, and there isn't really one that comes directly to mind. But I guess if you think about the walls in the temples and the pyramids of Egypt, and the hieroglyphs that are very narrative, that are able to kind of like follow a story for miles and miles and miles. I was really interested in finding a way to translate that onto a textile. And so we did develop a print inspired by the life of Field Marshal Muthoni Wakarima, who was a freedom fighter. We've shelved it for now. Let's see, I might show a glimpse of it at the end of the session, but for now, we shall move on. And so Nandi Flame was the first print that we produced and released. We printed with a couple of people. So the first print, I believe, we did with a printer in the Netherlands called House of View, who are incredible. House of View was introduced to us by Nikki Wester, who was one of the people that we consulted with on a call, one of our internal calls for this project. And I'd met Nikki a couple of years, I think 2 or 3 years ago in Sao Tome, and we became friends, and she's amazing and incredibly talented. And she works quite a bit with textiles. And so she was able to give us the contact for House of View, where we printed all of the textiles, which are currently hanging at Stroom in The Hague. So if you've seen those, all of those have been printed by House of View. And what's incredible about House of View is that they have all of this incredible, amazing, sustainable textile. So they have hemp, they have tinsel, they have ecovero, they have silk, they have bamboo, and they also have used circular textiles, which are these textiles that have been made from recycled PET bottles. So they're really incredible, and we really enjoyed working with them. Their website is amazing and really easy to use. And the textiles came out really beautifully. And I'll come back to kind of like the pros and cons of all the different suppliers that we've worked with. But before the prints arrived, we're able to do some kind of like digital rendering with Namnyak of NamLab here in Nairobi. Namnyak is an old friend of mine and the collective. We've worked with Namnyak, gosh, for so long. And she's wonderful. And so we had shared this print for Nandi Flame. And just at the time that we were starting, she was also rolling out this kind of digital rendering, because NamLab is a sampling studio, and now they also offer digital rendering. So we're able to start to visualize how these textiles could look and might look. So that was incredibly helpful for us. This was a little promo video that we shot by Noel the day that we announced that we're releasing Nandi Flame. We put out the announcement for Nandi Flame at about 9:30 a.m. And by around noon, around 12:15, 100 meters had sold out, which was wild, and is still wild to think about, because I don't think that we had imagined that there would be interest and curiosity in the textile, but I guess we didn't realize just how large the appetite was, and so that was really quite rewarding and humbling for us. It's been amazing to see some of the things that people have been doing with that first run of Nandi Flame. So on the left we have Lady Mandy in this really beautiful kind of like summer dress on the beach. On the right we have a kimono that was actually done by Namnyak. And I think we briefly toyed with the idea of making like a capsule collection, but then we're like, no, let's just put out the fabric as it is. And I think that what's really interesting about this process is a couple of things. One is you allow for a second level of creation and artistic input, which I think is really important, and also really natural to the way that the wider ecosystem of fashion works in Kenya. Many people have a tailor that they go to. You know, it's something that many of us have had, our parents had, and this process of co-creation is something that we are extremely familiar with, and it's really something that we wanted to see highlighted in the project. And so now we're really excited about some of these images that are starting to come in, because we're starting to see people doing things that with the fabrics that even we hadn't imagined. And so that's really, really beautiful. And also, with the first offering, we're able to offer the fabric at 650 shillings, which is about €5 a meter. And so it was incredibly accessible to everyone, to design students, to designers. And I think that that's been really useful for us in kind of like seeing where the magic price point is. Because for the second run of Nandi Flame, we printed locally with a printer called Spinners and Spinners. So the first one we printed in Turkey with a printer called Arguvan. We printed it on a really beautiful crepe chiffon. And our decision to print in Turkey was because we were completely unable to find a printer locally or in the region that we could work with our minimums. And so the closest we could get to was Turkey. And so even in that process, we learned many things. But the printers in Turkey were amazing. They did an incredible job in printing and delivering. And the pricing was amazing, which is why we're able to offer it at such a relatively low price. For the second run, we printed locally with Spinners and Spinners, who had a much higher price. We did print on a different textile. We printed on a stretch satin, which is a beautiful weight, has a beautiful luster. It sits on the body extremely beautifully. But the cost of production was almost double. So that meant that we were selling the fabric at about €10, because about 1150 Kenyan shillings. And so it's been interesting to see that the uptake on the second run has been much slower. And I do think that price is the reason. And so I've been speaking to a couple of people who, have kind of like gone in to buy, and there's quite a number of designers who really want to use the textile. However, buying the fabric at 1150 a meter pushes their cost of production into kind of like a new price category. So if you have someone who retails at between $30 and $50, if suddenly you're giving them inputs, a textile input that is double what they're used to, then you're going to have to force them into a new price category. And understandably, that's really not something that people are willing to do. So we found that people who had gone in to buy 30 meters were only buying 10. And so that's been really useful. And we've been kind of like thinking about, are we able to kind of like strike a balance in the printing because pricing is so important. Spinners and Spinners have also been incredibly open. We went back to them and we're like, listen, the fabric moving as fast as the first run, that we're also able to understand on their part. We were also able to understand on their part that their overheads are quite high. So like for anyone who knows, running a factory in Kenya is quite expensive because the cost of power is really high, land rates are quite high. So obviously they're also carrying that into their cost of production. So we're still figuring that out. And I'm aware that now I'm just running out of time. So around sustainable fibers and textiles, this part is ongoing because this part of the project has been significantly affected by the lockdowns that Nairobi has had, because the two kind of like weaving companies that we've been working with are all based outside of Nairobi. So that's Tosheka mostly, as well as Beacon of Hope. And so last year, for a long time, we were completely unable to access Tosheka. Actually, in fact, even they were unable to access the factory because the family that runs Tosheka, they live in Nairobi, and the factory is in Wate. So when we had that like long county lockdown, they were completely unable to go to the factory. And even recently, when we had the other county lockdown, the factory was closed. But we were able to make some textiles. So Tosheka are amazing because they have a silk project. So they farm Eri silk, which is also known as peace silk. And for those who may not know, the extraction of silk can be a bit problematic, especially mulberry silk, because you have to boil the worms to extract the silk. And so Eri silk is thought of as a more harmless option for silk, because to extract the silk, you don't need to harm the worms. So you get the silk, you allow for the worms to become moths, and just kind of, they can go out and live their beautiful moth lives. So Tosheka have this silk project. It's decentralized. So what they do is that they sell these kind of like worm kits to women across the eastern part of the country. So you get, I think it's like $30. You get about 100 worms. You get a bunch of castor leaves, because Eri worms feed on castor leaves, and then Tosheka will buy the silk from you. So on the right-hand side, all the silk is hand spun, because currently there isn't really any machinery that can do, well, in Kenya that is, or Tosheka don't have the machinery to do the machine spinning for the silk. So all the silk is hand spun, and you're able to see all the different kind of like sizes that the yarn can get. It takes quite a bit of skill to be able to hand spin really fine yarn. So I think that if you look at the bottom right, that I think is the finest yarn that they have, which currently is only being spun by this one woman. It's incredibly, incredibly fine. And it's insane to think that she's doing it by hand. Oh, wait, I don't know why this has opened. Okay, so far we've developed 2 textiles. So on the left-hand side with Beacon of Hope, we're still in the process of working on a textile that's made from cotton and sisal. This textile is really interesting because sisal is so fine. So you have sisal on the weft and cotton on the warp. And because sisal is so fine and so slippery, the cotton just kind of like slides, which then creates its really beautiful tinctures all along the fabric that I think are really fascinating. And then on the right, we have, with Tosheka, what we've done is a fabric from cotton and Eri silk. So we have cotton on the weft. No, cotton on the warp and silk on the weft. And you're able to see the kind of like hand spun Eri silk. It has this kind of like very irregular, it's a very irregular yarn, which gives the fabric this really beautiful texture. And so that's where we've gotten with that. The next phase for these 2 textiles is undergoing dyeing. So once those are done, we will share. So these are the suppliers that I talked about. House of You, Spinners and Spinners in Kenya, Argovan Textile in Turkey, who don't have a website. But if anyone needs their contacts, you can reach out to me. Beacon of Hope and Tosheka Textile, both in Kenya. I wanted to, actually, maybe I'll stop there, and then so we have some time for questions. If anyone would like to do some further reading on African textiles, there's these 3 books. A disclaimer is that they're all written by white men. So I really had to think long and hard about this reading list. But yeah. Yeah, I'll stop there and take some questions.
Yeah, wonderful. Sunny, thanks so much for sharing. And you really went deep in the project, which I think is really generous and great for those who were not familiar yet. And yeah, I do have some questions, and we have received some from the chat. Perhaps we start with them. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Valiant Vayaki asks, what was the process like of finding out the stories and histories of Kenyan heritage textiles? What kind of resources did you find useful and available? Of course, you've shared now some of the literature right now.
Yeah. I think one of the frustrating things about trying to find out about Kenyan textiles and Kenyan textile history is that the information isn't easy to find. And so for me, that was my biggest frustration. And I remember once having a conversation with Jim and telling him that I think that the Kenyan government hasn't invested, and not just the current government, but previous governments as well, haven't invested enough in remembering. And so anyone who is trying to find particularly pre-colonial history, it's incredibly difficult to find. And so sadly, those books that I mentioned were a useful starting point. And at least from there, I was able to have kind of like a sense. Yeah, but yeah, it's a lot of Googling, a lot of random books, a lot of trips to the museum, to the archives, to Nairobi Gallery, to African Heritage House. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like there's a lot to research by the young makers and people who are dedicated to the textile making and heritage now. Yeah. Great. Okay, we have some more questions coming. Let me get back to the right order. Adam Yaiwe asks, in your journey searching for manufacturers, did you find anyone in Kenya doing jacquard weaving or machine knitting?
So yeah, actually, spinners and spinners do machine knitting. I don't know if they do jacquard weaving, but they do machine knitting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Angela, wow, wonderful. I have learned so much. Thank you. Monica, will you be making a book or a film about the whole process and findings? Yeah, that question.
Oh my God. I'm not sure. I think that we definitely would like to do something with everything that we've learned in this project. We're not entirely sure what format that will take just yet. But yeah, something.
And Wangari asks, when will the other prints other than Nandi be available?
So this we really hoped to be able to print all the prints locally with spinners and spinners. But I think that with the feedback from this past weekend with this run, we're really we're rethinking that plan. I think that as much as we want to print locally, it's important to be able to listen to the feedback from the designers who would like to use it to develop more of their work. And so pricing is something that we have to take into consideration. So internally, we are still trying to figure out the best approach of, being able to do some production locally, but also being able to have an offering that's affordable. But yeah, I would say that it's highly likely that we'll do another drop within the month of June.
Great. And then the second question from Wangari was as well about the book. When is the book coming out? But you've already answered. So Mutete Bakita asks, on the story on sustainability in the textile industry, do you use natural dyes? And if so, could you give brief examples of the plant parts do you use? Thanks for sharing your knowledge. I extend my gratitude to you.
Natural dyes, gosh, there's so many. So Tosheka Textiles, who I mentioned, who are based in Wate, have kind of like a natural dye unit that's really incredible. But I think that whenever people think about natural dyes, they always think about, you know, these kind of like exotic plants. But there's such a long list of you know, kind of like everyday plants, vegetables, fruit that people use, whether it's from avocado skins to avocado pits to turmeric to, we actually did a dye sample with turmeric that came out really nicely, or henna or rust. Rust also creates a really beautiful dye. It's such a long list. But maybe reach out to Tosheka because Tosheka work with indigenous plants. And I forget the name. There's one in particular that they use that creates a really beautiful ochre color. And it starts with an M. And the plant is also used as malaria medicine. I'll remember it and then.
Yes, yeah. No. Yeah. Great. Yeah. And Gacheris shared, investing in remembering is beautiful, phrasing of what needs to happen. That was more like a comment. Thank you, Gacheri. And April Long, thanks, Sunny. There are amazing projects. How commercially sustainable are these projects in your view? It would be good to see these products more in the market. Well.
I think that that's what we're learning with this project. I think that the project is sustainable. But I think that it's this debate of producing locally versus being affordable is something that the scaling of this project will continuously run into. So if you want to be able to proudly say made in Kenya, you know, there's a kind of like, there's some cost implications to that. And it then makes, I guess, it makes me wonder if the consumer actually cares if something is made in Kenya as opposed to designed in Kenya. You know, I think what's been amazing about this project, you know, when you look at wax print and the ways in which wax print is sold, very little of the money and the revenue ends up on the continent. Usually it's the traders. The traders are the ones who will be able to make some revenue, but then the larger revenues are all leaving the continent. So whether it's the likes of Vlisco, or the Chinese companies that are now producing imitation wax, you know, you have all of this revenue that's leaving the continent. And so this project is interesting because it allows us to start to bring more of the revenues home within the value chain, as opposed to just the trader, right? So, you know, we have people like Monica and Lulu who design these motifs, and they were commissioned, so they were paid. You also have Textile Loft and people like NamLab. So you have far more touch points in Kenya, on the continent, as opposed to all of these other African textiles that are being designed and produced outside the continent. So I think that it absolutely is commercially sustainable, but I think that there's a bit of thought that needs to go around into where to produce and where makes the most sense commercially.
Yeah, thank you. We have one contribution from Nyokabi saying, "Hi, Sunny. The plant from the previous question is called the muku or
Yes,
wazi."
exactly.
Yeah.
Muku, yes, there you go.
Yeah, and
Oh,
then
and Nyokabi, actually, Nyokabi is from Tosheka. So Nyokabi is who I worked with as we're developing the cotton and silk. So thanks, Nyokabi.
yeah, hello there. Yeah, and then sorry. Okay, there was one more comment from Gacheri Ndumba saying that Mwarubaini name is the malaria medicine plant.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Thank you too.
Yeah.
And then we have a few more questions from Will Boaz. In light of the recent fight between Rwanda and the US about secondhand clothes, through this process, did you gain any insight into the textile industry and how to support positive domestic growth on a national, international level?
Whew. That's such a broad question. I didn't even know where to start tackling it from. I think that the issue of secondhand clothing is very complicated. I think that the US have always been very dishonest about the importance of the secondhand clothing market to them. And it wasn't until this threat by the East African community to phase out secondhand clothing that we saw just how valuable it is as an industry to them. For them to respond by threatening to get rid of AGOA. And I think I remember reading somewhere that I forget the exact figure, but it definitely is a multi-million-dollar industry for the US. And the US played dirty games, which is exactly what they did, and why Kenya and Tanzania ended up backing out of that ban. I think that textiles and textile interventions are happening in the region, but I think that there needs to be a lot more. Rwanda is really interesting because they're also starting to grow hemp. Kenya is still tied up in the moralities around hemp, which is not particularly useful. And I honestly feel like Rwanda will start producing hemp textile quite soon, which has been proven to be far better than cotton in terms of sustainability, in terms of the amount of resource needed. But then even locally, we have projects like Tosheka, we have projects like Pendeza, we have projects like Beacon of Hope that are exploring alternative textiles, that are exploring the scaling of textiles and the growing of textile manufacturing within the region. And similarly in Ethiopia, Ethiopia produced really beautiful cotton. But I think that as a region, as East Africa, we're not at the place where we're producing real commercial quantities of textile to be able to become the next textile sourcing hub. And so my hope is that the region and this kind of like East Africa community bloc can start to invest not just in garment manufacturing, which we've seen is an interest within East Africa. Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda all have projects that they're funding around building garment manufacturing capacity. But similarly, textile manufacturing requires the same investment and the same attention to really be able to grow and make an impact.
Yeah, thank you. I'm jumping a bit through all the comments. I see here, Mukami Karanja, would you consider having a print design contest to source more locally relevant prints?
Yes. I mean, I absolutely. I think the other thing that we hope that this project would do is encourage more Kenyan designers to make their own prints, that you don't have to be limited to the fabrics and the prints that you find at the market, that you can you can design your own. I don't know about a competition, but we definitely are interested in developing more prints. Sometimes I feel like competitions are a bit of they're like cheating, because what you do is that you ask everyone to send their best work, and then suddenly you have this pool of 100 people who have committed time and energy to produce this work for you, and then you just kind of like get to pick the best, and then everyone else goes home with nothing. I think that commissioning is a far more ethical way of working with artists, because then you commit to an artist, you commit to their process, you commit to their aesthetic. There's a reason that we chose Monica and Lulu. We love their work, we love their approach, and for me that's something that I feel far better about than doing a competition.
Yeah, thank you. Understandable. Yeah. Adelheid Smith is asking, how do we spell the dyeing organization you mentioned? You shared. Yeah, type in. Wonderful. Thank you.
And Nyokabi is here, so Nyokabi can also put
thank you.
The Instagram page.
Yeah, and then a lot of compliments and thanks. I don't want to be unfair to anyone, but I'm scanning through, looking for more questions.
I did want to add something.
Yes.
Because I'd also written a couple of things that I thought would be important to reflect on. So the two textiles that we printed on commercially so far are both synthetic. And we started off with the project with every intention on printing on sustainable textiles. However, we ran into the same issue and the same challenge that many people run into when they want to be sustainable or use sustainable materials, which is cost. I think for a lot of the materials that we were looking at that were sustainable, whether in terms of silk, obviously silk is quite expensive, but even in terms of things like bamboo, things like hemp, things like the use circular, we would have been even more expensive. We would have been even more expensive than we are currently, because a lot of those, if you look at House of You, a lot of those materials will start anywhere at around 15 euro a meter. So you can imagine if you're printing for 15 euro a meter and you haven't even shipped, that means that you'll be selling for anywhere between 20 to 25 euro a meter. And I think that that's just way too expensive. And I think that there's a wider thing there around the pricing of sustainability and sustainable materials, that they have to become affordable. You can't, for as long as rayon, viscose, polyester are selling at 3 euro a meter and your sustainable materials are selling at 20 euro a meter, I think it becomes difficult to make a case for sustainable materials to a large part of the population who simply can't afford them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is something, we have to change our methods of production completely, to more sustainable materials, and
It should be the other way around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, it should be expensive.
Yeah, because there's somewhere someone is paying the price for it, of course. And ultimately it's the planet, but or many other people. So we have some very nice words. This is amazing, extremely knowledgeable. Thank you, Niokabi. Erica the Greef, maybe. Thank you, Sunny. I agree with Gaceri. Investing in remembering is so beautiful, and what you have shared today about your projects presents such incredible examples of what remembering could look like. So that was more like a comment. And then Muteki, sorry, something changed here. Yeah, Fashion Revolution Kenya have a very detailed study on natural fabrics in Kenya, as well as in industry players. Thank you.
Wangari from Fashion Revolution is on the call, so thanks, Wangari.
Angela Mirutu, to the organizers, can we kindly be able to access this video later? If yes, kindly direct us to the platforms. Absolutely. The idea is to upload the last 3 presentations very soon. Next week, we can share on Strom's YouTube channel. And yeah, you'll have to look for us, Strom Den Haag, on YouTube, and we can be doing that probably Monday, if not Tuesday. So the last talks, were by Jim Chushu, Njoki Ngumi, and today Sunny's. We were, of course, creating some expectation for it because we didn't want to share so soon. So we really wanted people to be live together right now. But yes, we'll share them. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, I was super touched as well with the silkworms farms, and I can understand this project in itself will take a while in many ways, not only because of the long-term the making of it, but also probably for you to find the best way to use it. I don't know how. Yeah, if you're planning to share it soonish, or maybe not.
I think that the kind of artisanal processes that we've been using for the sacred cloths and the sustainable textiles have been a huge learning for me, because I've also had to completely rethink the way that working with artisans looks like, right? So I mentioned that Tosheka have a decentralized way of kind of like collating all the silk that's produced. So you have, the women, they harvest the silk, they spill the yarn, and then Tosheka buys it back. But because everyone is operating on such different timelines, in many ways you can't rush them, And so Nyokabi will tell you that there's a period that I kept on rushing. I was like, no, I need more meters. No, I need more meters. And she was just like, I haven't gotten any more silk. I haven't gotten any more silk. And there was a time when Nyokabi and I were talking, and the Tosheka project is incredible because the potential is insane, and it's such a beautifully scalable project, right? Because if you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women buying these kits and starting to generate an additional source of income by just, you have this little like shed in the corner where you have the worms and you're able to harvest silk every now and again. But also that decentralization comes with its own challenges. But I also think that that's the beauty of sustainable practice, is that you can't rush it. And that you have to, it dictates its own pace, and that you have to be okay with that. Obviously, COVID has been a kind of like added stress, because then every now and again, when we have a lockdown, it means either Nyokabi can't go and open the factory, or the women have challenges in kind of like getting the silk to Tosheka, So I think that it's been, we've definitely been rethinking the pace of that. And I think that I'm not a place where I'm like, okay, this part of the project will take as long as it's going to take, and I wouldn't be harassing Nyokabi every week to be like, I need more silk, I need more silk.
Absolutely. And that doesn't add anything to the ritualistic value of it if we deal with it as in any capitalist production.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And I think that the slowness of the production then introduces a new sort of intentionality that I really like, because then it means that you are following up on this textile. And Nyokabi will tell you, I think that we've been working on this this kind of like final production since December, because I think the last time I was in Wote was in December, and it's now June, but then it's the fabric is always on my mind, and so there is that intentionality that I think is useful and important.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. We have to wait.
Michelle has just put in the link for the Kenneth Eze video, so I can play that really quickly before we close.
There were some links other people are sharing as well. Yeah. Okay. Oh, cool.
All my tabs. Great. So that was a video. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, what was really amazing about Kenneth is that a shuka is traditionally woven on a very small, narrow handheld loom. But yeah, he kind of redesigned the loom to be a standing, quite a wide loom. And the weaver is wearing one of his scarves. Yeah, those like, it went on to play the next video. So yeah, so his work is amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, more comments, and thank you so much, Sunny. Loved your insightful presentation. Yeah, super inspiring. Asante. Yeah. So thanks everyone for staying with us until now, and thank you, Sunny, for sharing all this this beautiful process. And I'd like to remind everyone, if you're in The Hague, you still can check out our window display at Strom, which is showing the Nest's latest experiments. And you can obviously check out and follow on strom.nl, and this is the nest.com. We'll be sharing more of this project very soon. It has been an honor and a pleasure to work with you despite the great distance, and we learned a lot with the Nest Collective. Thank you again. And I also would like to thank Michelle